Happy New Year everybody, and welcome back to my channel. In today's video we're gonna find out how bad this almost 9-year-old i7-3770 processor will bottleneck the RTX 2080 Ti, which is on par with the new RTX 3070 in 2021. But before that, please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe down below, and thank you for watching. Alright, so before I begin with this video, I'd like to ask everyone for a small favor. Please go ahead and hit the like button down below right now. It really helps to grow the channel, and I appreciate it. So as I start this new year off with reviewing this soon-to-be a 9-year-old platform, which consists of an i7-3770 paired with the RTX 2080 Ti, which is on par with the new RTX 3070, to see how bad it'll bottleneck in 2021. I'm gonna go over this build here and all the parts and the tweaks, and then I'm gonna do some gaming benchmarks along with some other benchmarks. So without further ado, let's get to it. So what we have here is an i7-3770, which originally came out in April of 2012. Now this was the first processor to support the PCI Express 3.0, as well as the first generation of the 22nm technology, and also was the last generation processor that you could overclock simply by increasing the turbo frequency in the BIOS. And the max frequency that you could do is 4.3 gigahertz. And after that generation, you really couldn't do that anymore, and the only way you could overclock a little bit non-K processor is tweaking the base clock frequency, which I'm sure you know how well that works. You really don't get much out of it. Now, the motherboard I'm using here is an Asus P8Z77-V. There were tons of different versions of the Asus P8Z77 motherboards. This is not the best, but not the worst, and it has some issues with it. Couple of things in the past that I noticed in a lot of these P8Z77 motherboards is the RAM issue, which a lot of the DIMMs end up going bad, where you pretty much forced to use a single channel memory option, and that kind of sucks because you do lose a lot of performance. But this motherboard here seems like to work somewhat properly with a little bit of issues. The RAM is working fine. I have 2 sticks of 8 totaling for 16 gigs of RAM running at 2400 megahertz in dual channel. This is the Evga RAM sticks that I like to use for all my 3rd and 4th generation builds. It seems like pretty much the best maximum option to use on these older generation boards to get the most out of your build. And definitely recommend you, if you're in a 3rd and 4th generation, still go up to 2400 megahertz. That's the way to go. And it's working pretty fine with this board, just activating the XMP profile. And I do have this overclocked to 4.3 gigahertz. Also, I did mess around with the base clock a little bit to 103.5. Now what's strange with this board is in BIOS it shows 4.4 gigahertz and it shows 2400 and change megahertz on the RAM, and that's all working fine. But when you do check out the CPU-Z and some other benchmarks, it only shows up as 4.3 only, and in game it seemed to show like 4.1 at most of the time. But when I do the other benchmarks, it does show 4.3. So that's a little strange about this motherboard. I know I used other motherboards like the Gigabyte ones, and they don't seem to have that issue. But other than that, it's running pretty smooth. This is a very good motherboard, actually. Supports SLI, and when the both cards are in, and it's in X8 mode, and that's where you want to be, an SLI. Of course, we're not doing that review today, but you know, this was years ago an excellent board to get that extra performance out of SLI, because it did support it quite well. Okay, so let's move over to cooling. What I have here is a CoolerMaster T4. It's a very good cooler, and it does have the 4 heat pipes, and it's a little step down below an Evo 212, but it's perfect for this build. And at 4.3 gigahertz, the temperatures are excellent. You really don't have to worry about anything at all. Definitely this processor is not as hot as the 3770K, and you know, I'll show you in a benchmark. It's pretty close to the performance. I was very surprised. Now next here, let me jump into the power supply. A lot of the parts here are pretty old, including this power supply, probably as old as this build, which is the Corsair TX 750, bronze rated. It's not a modular power supply, but it has plenty of connections, and it's just enough for the system. As you could see, it's quite enough for the RTX 2080 Ti, which is pretty powerful card. It does require 2 8-pin connectors, but it's doing its job. For the drives, I have some budget 120 gig SSD. I believe it's a Crucial, I think. Very old. And for the secondary storage, I have a 1 terabyte Raptor drive. That's right, 1 terabyte Raptor drive. These are the 10,000 RPM ones, which is a very old drive. There's nothing special. If you get a brand new SATA drive right now, like Western Digital, actually will feel and work better, faster than this, because this thing is so old. It does make that crunchy noise too, but you know, just putting something together, and that's what I had laying around. I also have, for a build like this, I have a DVD writer up on top, and for cooling, I have lots of fans here going on, 3 different brands actually. I have 2 120mm blue LED fans up front, which is by CoolerMaster, and I have a 140mm exhaust fan, that's a Roswell, and on top I have 2 blue LED 120mm fans made by Corsair. May have been the ones that came with this case here, and this case is pretty old too. This is the Corsair 400R, the gray edition, and you know, to me, I love these older cases. They're very roomy. This one does not come with a glass panel or anything, but some ventilation on the side, but very roomy, very neat. Definitely easy to work with. And I actually removed one of the top trays. There was a top tray there in between to get that better cooling. I'm really not going to use any more drives than just the 2 there for this build. And really, if you want a clean look, you could always remove this bottom tray, and I've done that before, and just have like an SSD on the bottom mounted with there's holes underneath. Nice clean look. That way it allows the 2 fans to really like open airflow through, kind of like what all the new cases are. And for your secondary storage, you could just put it in one of the 3.5-inch bays on top with a little adapter tray, and that will give you a really clean look. That's something to think about if you have this old case. What else can I say about here? Yeah, I mean, overall I'm very happy with the performance here. This is the RTX card that I have, that I use for all my videos on Bottleneck videos. This is, you know, I invested into it quite a while back, and this is pretty much the best card I have right now, and that's what I'll be using for most of my test benchmarks. I did have the RTX 3070. You could see a review on that, which is on par with this, and even though it was only like $550 or so, I still end up getting rid of that, returning it, and keeping this because the performance is the same, but this is 11 gigs, so I end up keeping this because, you know, times are tough nowadays, so you gotta go with what you have. Yeah, that's pretty much it. So what we're gonna do now is do some benchmarks, maybe take a closer look at this build, and then jump into some gaming benchmarks I'll try to do multiple resolutions like 1080p, maybe even 4K or something like that. And overall, my opinion is it's still a good build, and if you're on a budget and you don't have money to upgrade, I would stick with this. If you get everything running right, you got the right RAM, good power supply, you're gonna get good performance. You're really gonna get at a higher resolution, you know, 1440p 4K with this card is gonna be on par with just a lot of the modern stuff already, so it's really pointless. Yes, there will be bottleneck on 1080p, that's for sure. That's just the way it is with the older systems. But at a higher resolution, you're going to be neck and neck with some of the best, both on AMD and Intel. So that's what I'm going to show you in this video. So without further ado, let's get into those benchmarks. So stay tuned. So here, let me show you the BIOS settings really quickly before I get into some benchmarks. As you can see, the motherboard is P8Z77-V, and the BIOS version is 2104. This is the latest and the final version. There are no more after that. As you can see, 16 gigs of RAM. And here just shows you the processor, which is going to be at its stock frequency. Now let me jump into the advanced mode. I'll show you my overclock. So right here it shows you indeed that I am at 4.450 and the RAM is at 2484 megahertz. Now it's a little bit higher because I do have the base frequency here at 103.5 just to get a little extra juice. XMP profile 1 and the core ratio limit at 43, and once again that's the limit for this processor. If you try to do 44, it doesn't do it, so 43, it just jumps to 43. This is pretty much my overclock, and nothing on the CPU voltage. Just keep that on auto because really this processor doesn't need it, especially at this low overclock. No issues at all. Doesn't get too hot or anything like that, and doesn't crash at all. So yeah, that's it for my settings here. Let's get into some benchmarks. Now I'm going to show you the CPU Z and just go over all the numbers here. And this is what I was talking about. There's an issue here, it appears, with this motherboard. As I've just shown you on the BIOS, I have it at the base clock at 103.5, and for some reason this motherboard does not show in the CPU Z any higher than this right here, just under 100 megahertz here. So therefore it only shows up to, you know, 43 multiplier, you know, just at 4.3 megahertz. And I don't remember having an issue with another Asus motherboard like this, but nevertheless it does perform well, and I just don't know why it does that in this case. But let's take a look, and you could see you know, everything looks good here. Let's take a look at the benchmark here really quick. What I'm going to compare this processor to is some of the newer i7s, the 7th, 6th, and the 4th generation right here. So let's start off with the 4th generation really quick, just to give you an idea when this processor is overclocked. And now I did check that if I leave the base frequency in the BIOS at 100, I do get a lower score. So when I do increase it to 103.5, I get slightly about 2 more percent. So look at that. We're at 96% compared to the stock 4790K, and that's not bad on a single core. And this is, you know, our multi-thread numbers here. So let's jump up one notch up to 6700K, and now we're at 91% versus the 100. Still not bad at all, just to show you how good this whole processor is. And now the final comparison is the i7-3700K, and we're at 88% here versus 100. Once again, not bad at all. And remember, the i7-7700K was the last 4-core 8-thread processor in the i7 lineup, so it's a good processor to compare to, and it's still a pretty good processor to game with. So as you can see, that this old i7-3770 still got it, and it's still definitely quite worth keeping, especially nowadays with the way the prices are and the availability of the newer processors out there. So let's jump into the next benchmark. And here is Cinebench R15. I'm going to start off with the single core score here. So as you could see, I am at 155, and once again, this processor is overclocked to about 4.4 and a half. And for some reason here it shows on this chart that the multi-processor ratio is at 4.76, and that's the score I get, 155, which is a pretty good score for a single core here. And check out some other charts out there and you kind of get an idea how well of a score this is, especially for an old processor. As you could see, it beats out the stock i7-3930K, which is a 6-core 12-thread processor, and the stock i7-3770 single core number is 138, so you get a nice little boost with that overclock, and it's just 10 points under a stock i7-4770K, so that's a pretty good result in my opinion. Alright, let's take a look at the multi-core number here, and here I am getting 737. Once again, that is overclocked. Not a bad score at all. As you could see, the stock version before that is 662, so about 80 point difference or so, more or less. So it does give a nice performance boost when you overclock the processor, and about 80 points under the i7-4770K, which is a very good processor as well. And yep, so yeah, that's pretty much it for that. Now all there is left to do is get into some gaming test benchmarks, so stay tuned for that. Alright, so the first game I'm going to test is Control. Let's take a look at the settings. I'm going to start off on 1080p full screen on the highest preset. Everything on except motion blur is off. And let's get an idea here what kind of frame rates we get. It looks like we're around 130 on average. Not bad at all. Again, with the RTX 2080 Ti, which is slightly overclocked by 100 megs on the core and 300 megs on the memory. And this is the overclock that I've been using for this card and all my videos. It's pretty much a performance guaranteed out the door without messing around with any of the voltage in the MSI afterburner. Very easy way to boost up your FPS without really hurting your card.
Bureau of Control. All these years I've been looking for them, and they were hiding in plain sight. Hello? Hey, it's...
There you are. What's happening?
Evga.
Okay.
I've done enough night shift loaner jobs to know it makes us come off weird. Auntie the janitor is a friendly face in my book.
Better than somebody with no face at all. Think about it. No face.
But that said, I know what you're thinking. If there's an ex-murderer around, that's him.
Alright, let's take a look at 1440p this time. Once again, we're keeping the setting the same on the ultra or high preset, whatever you want to call it. And now we're dropping down to the 90s. Totally makes sense.
The cell and the poster. I was 11 years old the first time I saw behind the poster. They told me I imagined it. I've been trying to pull it down ever since. Will you help? Did I lose you there for a moment? You know what's on my mind. My baby brother, Dylan. 17
This is a really beautiful
since the
game.
end of this bureau took him.
Great for testing on that new build.
Shit. You want me to pick it up? The murder weapon? Really? Look at this place. Where am I?
Alright, so I'm gonna wrap this game up with the 4K resolution. Again, these are the settings. Not testing out the ray tracing in this video. And now it dropped even less, so we're like around 70 FPS. Now this part of the game, you are gonna get higher frame rates, so really once you get out of this area, you should be averaging around 50 FPS on 4K on high settings.
The same gun. Okay. Now I have a gun. Things have quieted down outside. It's safe to go.
Alright, so that concludes the test for this game. Let's move on to the next one. Ah yes, the good old Battlefield 5. Wouldn't be a FPS benchmark without this game. So let's start off with the 1080p ultra settings. As you could see, everything is maxed out, full screen. Let's take a look here. 1080p. Now here you could definitely see the bottleneck on 1080p, as I am using a pretty top tier card still in today's standards, the RTX 2080 Ti, which is on par with the 3070. And usually with a more modern processor on 1080p ultra settings, you should be around 160, 170, maybe even 180 FPS. So here is a perfect example of the bottleneck. But there is definitely no issue of playing this game. And in my opinion, if you're gonna have a high-end graphics card, you really want to start getting into the higher resolution. So in certain areas the average does pick up, but it's not as stable as it would be on a more modern platform. But it's still not bad. So what happens here is, in order to eliminate the bottleneck, you really want to go in higher resolution. Alright, let's jump into 1440p and see how that looks. So now we are on 1440p, once again on ultra settings, everything's maxed out. Motion blur off, VSync off, and we are running on DirectX 11. And this is exactly what I was talking about, the bottleneck. Now at 1440p seems to be the sweet spot with this processor and this graphics card. So we are actually averaging better than on 1080p. Or about the same, depends on which section of the game here is. But you could see it's very similar to the 1080p FPS average. So if you want to stay around 100 FPS average with this setup, you definitely want to be on 1440p. And that's not bad at all. Shows you that still a 9-year-old platform here still could hold its own. Again, there is no stuttering, there is no issues with this game at all. No lag. Okay, now let's wrap this test up with 4K. Okay, there it is. Once again, we're gonna keep it on ultra settings. Let me show you once again here. That's it. Okay, and now we're fully utilizing everything, the processor and the card. And if you want to make a comparison to a more modern system with the same card, you really want to be at 4K resolution, as we are averaging around, you know, high 80s to 90s in 4K maxed out. Not bad at all.
Notre identité face à l'immensité de la guerre, une autre foule, un autre cadavre, et pour laisser je me disais, je suis aimé, je suis un tirailleur, et que Dieu nous aide.
Really holding strong in this area here with a lot of explosions. Alright, so that concludes the test for this game. Let's move into the next one. And now we have here Cyberpunk 2077, one of the more harder games to run, even with the RTX 2080 Ti. So we're going to start off with 1080p ultra settings. As you can see, 1080p full screen. And I am on ultra settings with motion blur off. And remember, this game is DirectX 12 only, so that's what we have to go with here. And we are achieving that 60 FPS average. That's on 1080p, ultra settings. Not bad at all.
Yes?
Oh. Oh, the detail is very good.
I'm not afraid of anyone, you know?
Have I not seen you somewhere?
You could see the CPU usage is pretty high, just like in the previous game. Not always a bad thing. Temperatures are looking good here. Alright, let's go into the next resolution. We're going to keep the same settings, ultra. Again, ultra settings with motion blur off. Okay. So there you have it. There's your answer. Definitely some bottleneck on 1080p resolution, as we are very close on the FPS average to 1080p resolution on Ultra. So definitely some bottleneck there. And once again, if you want to have a nice card like this, you do want to be at the high resolution. So 1440p and up on all the games should be just fine with this processor. Once again, there is no issues, there's no lag, there's no stuttering. The game runs extremely smooth, looks great. Even like this newspaper here, looks very detailed. And even though that this processor is overclocked to 4.3 gigahertz, it's only showing at just about 4.1. So I believe indeed there is an issue with this motherboard, but this is what I had for this video. This is what I wanted to go with. Your results may vary. Alright, so let's just wrap it up in 4K resolution just to see how it looks. Okay, now we're at 4K once again on Ultra preset with motion blur off. Okay, now we're dropped quite a bit in mid 30s on average. I believe that that is pretty much what you're gonna get with any processor and this card combination. The only way to go higher in this point is activating DLSS option, but I'm not doing that in this video. Just focusing on the standard resolutions. Well, that concludes the test for this game. On to the next one. So this is the final game I'll be testing out in this video, Death Stranding. It's a very visually impressive game, and we're gonna start off as usual with 1080p and work our way up to see how bad is the bottleneck. So we're at 1080p full screen on very high settings. Not using any of these NVIDIA DLSS or Fidelity. We're just gonna keep it at these settings here with motion blur off. And once again, there is clear bottleneck here, as with more of a high-end processor. For instance, I've tested this game with my i9-9900K on 1080p with exact the same settings. I'm somewhere like around 160 FPS in 1080p. So, like I said before, the best usage of this processor, and again, this is not a bad processor at all. It does its job, but you just want to be at a higher resolution to really take advantage of the graphics card. So Alright, so let's jump into the next resolution. (1440p), keeping it at the same settings. And as I expected, we're getting exact the same FPS average as we would on 1080p, so now we're closing the gap on that bottleneck. Now, in my opinion, if you were on a budget and you're looking for an extremely cheap rig, if it was between this i7-3770 and like an old AMD FX setup, I would go for this for sure. You're still gonna get better results with this, especially in the high resolutions. Very nice. So yeah, I'm wrapping up this video. I'm gonna do one last resolution just to see what it looks like here. Let's see what we got. That's right, 4K. Here it is. Again, the same old settings. And there it is, very nice. Looks like we're in the 80s, averaging it in the 80s. And that's where you really see the bottleneck disappear now. And the kind of average you could expect with 4K will be on par with a lot of the other modern, newer processors out there. So if you want to play this game on 4K or 1440p, then this platform is still for you, and I really don't see a reason to upgrade unless you have some extra money to throw away, which is definitely respectable. So that's it for this video. Let me know what you guys think. Leave some comments down below. Let me know what old rig you got. And yep, I'll see you guys in another video, and thank you for watching, and goodbye.
Anybody here?